recording here. So just to set up some housekeeping for this this webinar, we're going to go through it for about an hour. We'll save some time for questions at the end. This webinar will be recorded, so we will be distributing it after the fact. If you want to look through any of the slides or review any of the content we discussed today. And yeah, I think that's about it. So let's just get started. I really want to get into this topic. It's definitely something exciting and interesting, but let me first just tell you briefly about myself. Yeah, sorry if you can hear the loud New York City background noise, excuse that. But so yeah, my name is Jason Marticello. I always tell people how I got into insights because it sets up for why behavioral science is so critically important today. So when I was a kid, I used to be very obese, overweight, and I lost over 130 pounds when I was, in my teenage years. And then I going to school for exercise physiology. I got fascinated in this weight loss. I ended up pursuing this path of health and physiology, nutrition and fitness. And, after I spent a good portion of my life in that, I had a revelation that not anything I learned had little to do with that weight loss. In other words, my weight loss was not due to anything I learned in school, but rather based on these subconscious factors that played a role in how I made decisions, such as who my friends were, where I lived. And this kind of led me to this field of behavioral science. I started working with a social psychologist named Dr. David Neal, and ultimately went back to business school and moved back to New York, where I am now, working with Beezy. So Beezy is a behavioral science agency. Helped start Beezy about 4.5 years ago. And we are focused on using behavioral science to help our clients get a better understanding of consumer decision making and influencing consumer behavior to ultimately drive better commercial outcomes for our clients. When it comes to premiumization, I kind of mentioned that this is such a critical topic. I've been working in this space for about 3 years, trying to really understand how consumers value products and brands, and what are ways that we can help uncover new and differentiated ways to win over consumer decisions, help them value our brands and products more, and ultimately to stay and remain competitive in this environment that's just been increasingly challenging with inflation, supply chain challenges, as well as a host of other issues that complicate the brand and marketing space. So for today, we have 60 minutes, about 50 now, and we're going to go through what I believe to be a comprehensive overview of some key and critical topics as it relates to premiumization. We'll first start with defining it, what it is, what it's not, why it's important. We're going to pivot to this 5 paths of premiumization. This is a new way to look at how you should premiumize and how to think about it. This is a technique and strategy we use to help come up with new ideas to to premiumize brands. We'll next pivot to these 4 premiumization strategies. This is a way to think about how to implement and action some of premiumization within your company. And then our 4th bucket here is we'll look at some behavioral science tactics. So one of the things we've been really pushing towards is, it's great to come up with great ideas, but how do we actually implement them? What are some of the behavioral science tools that can be helpful in that process? And then lastly, we'll go through a testing example. Here at Beezy, we're big on testing, and we'll showcase a little bit of how we go about that. So I always start, I don't know, I absolutely love this image. I found it a couple of years ago, but it really sets up for, why premiumization is so important. We have Golden's mustard over here, sitting next to a store brand, Walmart, great value. But what's most intriguing is the price points of these, of these products. a mustard that's been in the market for, decades is undercharging compared to great value, is underpriced compared to great value. This is, this is literally, it kind of defeats the purpose of the brand. So I want to take a step back. So when we think about growth, everyone's interested in growth. We want to grow our brand. We want to stay relevant. We want customers to value our brand. Historically, brands have focused on penetration. And, for rightful reason. That is one of the key ways typically for, quick growth is, penetrating markets, getting more, broadening out your customer base. However, as we move through from emerging to develop to mature categories, the growth and penetration declines. In other words, as categories become tapped out in terms of, full penetration, the amount of growth from them becomes limited. This is why premiumization becomes very opportunistic in, mature categories, which a lot of categories that we operate in are, mature, are a lot of consumer packaged goods, especially in the States. I mean, even in a lot of developed countries. So why is this important? There's a lot of, national brands that kind of, sit here in this graph between, a low and high price. They used to compete by, lowering price and, gaining market share. But the challenge is now there's new, the barriers to entry have changed. There's now new brands coming into the market. There's store and private label that are just entering. So it ultimately forces the market forces push up and force growth towards a premiumization strategy. So when we take a step back, I like to think about growth in terms of not just penetration. Penetration is still important, but we need to think about how premiumization fits into that picture. I love this quote from the CEO here at Nestle. There's no point in trying to outcompete private label and chase unprofitable growth. We're not trying to be the leader when it comes to going south on pricing. And that makes absolute sense. We want to, be perceived as higher value, and we want our customers to want to choose us more and value us more. So what is premiumization? So here's a simple definition: willingness to pay a premium price for a brand. There's three elements I want to call attention to. There's the willingness aspect. So customers are motivated or they have a desire to, okay? So there's a key motivation part. Second is that they're going to pay a premium relative to a context. The context piece is critical. We'll come back to that later. Everything is relative to a context. And then lastly, a higher value. Obviously, we need to ascribe that higher value. So it's super critical. When we think about premiumization, I often get people, not everyone, but some people, they just think of like Gucci, like Prada, like their head goes to like, extreme luxury brands. And that's not necessarily the case. The goal of premiumization to charge sometimes pennies more, because over that big base, that customer base, that's going to amount to, significant growth. So when we think about premiumization, let's think about it in terms of sometimes just, it could be, from 10 cents, 20 cents to $1. It depends on the product and the category, but it doesn't have to be, a significant jump in price. It's more about a customer valuing the brand and product more, in it allowing the brand to charge more for it. And that's what's key. So that's why the penetration premiumization is a nice duo when it comes to, strategic growth. I mean, simply put, premiumization is increasing your contribution margin. It's literally increasing your customer perceived value and minimizing the cost and adding it. So that's ultimately the goal. We're going to talk a little bit more about this. There's a lot of issues that plague premiumization. But, and I wrote a Quirks piece on this. So we often let economics inform our pricing. It's definitely a challenge. We rely on willingness to pay. And, these kind of limit us from understanding what the true potential is a customer would be willing to pay for something. If we ask them, they're never going to tell us something over what they're always going to say the lowest number possible. So, some of our methods for understanding pricing definitely limit us to a premiumization of our brands and products. Another thing we're going to highlight this, thinking in terms of objective value. We often like to value features and benefits and, what's the incremental someone would pay for X or Y. We'll show why that's necessarily not that helpful. And then, just thinking about pricing in a vacuum. This is something we'll discuss a little bit later too, because when you understand how, customers think about pricing relative to a shelf or relative to their basket or relative to other categories that they're mentally processing at that current moment in time, it just opens up and it changes the reference points for which you can ultimately command additional value. So the point is, I'm just trying to highlight there's things that we've done for years and decades that just limit our ability to premiumize, and we're definitely going to want to overcome them as we think about new ways to premiumize. So I'm going to first go through the 5 paths to premiumization. This is something I think will be super interesting for a lot of you to, when you navigate thinking about ways to command additional value amongst your products and categories. So when I'm going to take a step back here. When I first started, thinking about premiumization and customer value, what is a customer willing to pay for? When we look through them, typically marketers and market researchers always, kind of cling to innovation. In other words, we have to give the customer something in order to charge more. So, and I don't know, I didn't really think that's necessarily true. And I started to look into the scientific literature. And when I started to understand value from different perspectives, it started to tell me something a little bit different depending on what scientific discipline I looked in. So for instance, when I went into evolutionary psychology, what does evolutionary psychology say about value? The value in evolutionary psychology is to survive and reproduce. So therefore, the extent that my product can help survival and reproduction, that's more I'm going to value that brand more, value that product more. When I look into biology, what does biology say about value? And biology the key element of biology is to conservation of energy. We want to reduce our energy costs. We want to be efficient humans. And that's a huge opportunity that technology has significantly capitalized on. So to the extent that a brand or product can be perceived as making their brand or product easier, they'll pay more for it. And I'm going to go through each of these a little bit more, give some examples. But what I'm trying to really uncover here is we have a broader lens of value creation. Economics, this one you guys are familiar with, it's innovation, it's adding features, adding benefits to products. This one will always be important, but it's typically the one that we really focus on. Cognitive psychology, I'd say a lot more brands have been, expanding into this. It's more about memorable experience. I'm going to show you guys a way to think about this to help expand value creation when it comes to creating memorable experiences. There's been a lot of research in this cognitive psychology in terms of how value exists outside of a product, but also in the mind, even thinking about a product. I'm going to explain that in a sec. And then social psychology. This one's one of my favorite just because of the popularity of people's social images, everything to do with social media. In other words, people will pay more to enhance their image. People have a desire to look good in front of their family, their friends, in terms of some, ways in which they want to be perceived. And to the extent that your company or brand can enhance those broader social goals and make people look good, people will pay more for products. So I'm just going to give you a few examples. So when we were working in the water category, this is, I think, one of the most fascinating examples is, water is free in 99% of households. People who buy water, I can understand people who buy water. Then there's people who buy water at 2 to 3 times, the price of, a standard, basic bottled water. And this is just amazing. I mean, from a premiumization perspective, if you think about it, because water, I mean, there's not literally a ton that's being added to water to make it, significantly better, but there's a lot of other things that are taking place. So on the left here, we have Life Water. This is just kind of like a t-shirt. It's like an extension of your social image that you carry. They put artistic elements on the bottle and people are willing to pay more for it. This is a phenomenal example of, paying more to enhance your image. On the right, this is an innovation example. Yeah, so clearly there's ways to add value by adding things to water. Not a surprise, but nonetheless, we just want to showcase that there's other pathways. We have some folks here, I think, from representing the Colgate brand. This is a really good example of, paying more to, enhance your image. Toothbrush sits out, and I will say the new Keep brush is pretty phenomenal looking. It's worth showcasing. And it's also, there's some do good environmental elements that you're reducing plastic, you're doing good for the environment. So, these are phenomenal ways. And obviously there's a premium charge on top of it. So the water, these are really good examples. The idea is tying things to people's, to their image, things they care about in front of people who they care about. So this is certainly a very interesting way in which we explore in terms of, finding ways to premiumize. Innovation, I'm not going to talk a lot about this one. You guys are experts on it. Experience is one I definitely want to talk about. So there's been a lot published in the cognitive psychology as well as the social sciences in terms of how people perceive value in terms of, and the way I like to showcase is on this graph. When we think of an experience of a product, we typically limit it to the consumption. Mainly, that's how we generally think about it. But there's so many examples where it's beyond the consumption. So for example, especially with food, I always like to use the example of food because I love food. I love thinking about food. I get tons of value thinking about my dinner in advance. And another example that comes to mind is Disney. Disney sells, they provide a magic band in advance to going to Disney World. And the reason they do that is because the more you think about it, the more valuable that experience becomes. There's value that's created when people just think about an experience. I get it when we think about consumer products or consumer packaged goods, people aren't dwelling on these products for months in advance. But there's ways to get people to think about them more, or even after the fact, where it can create additional value. And the other thing, so what I push our clients to think about is, how can we extend that experience and get people to think about it more in a way that's positive, that can create anticipatory value or remembered value after the fact? How can they share that experience more? A lot is done on the remembered side, sometimes sharing that with friends, online, social media, etc. But the point is, let's broaden the experience utility beyond just the consumption itself. Within consumption, I generally like to help our clients push towards integrating other sensory elements. This is a way to build the intensity of the experience. And certainly you're definitely bound depending on the category you're in. But, for instance, if you're doing something with food or interacting with the body, whether it's lotion or, brushing your teeth. There's a big opportunity to capitalize on more sensory elements and ultimately heighten that experience. So the key takeaway is integrate, broadening the experience and also incorporating different senses. Just a couple examples. I mentioned the Magic Band. Getting people to think about that experience more will ultimately create more anticipatory value. And then, there's also, this can here. They added this, looks great, feels amazing. It's a tactical sense. They're integrating more sensory elements, with the can, with the touch. These are ways to carve out different, new value. Pay more for ease. This one's one of my favorite, just because it's so powerful in shaping decision making. I have a lot of examples. Amazon's business is built on ease. I was at the CRC conference yesterday with Dan Heath. He was given the keynote and he said, imagine if Amazon had a 14-click purchase. The whole purpose behind, the success of the business model of Amazon is built on making it easy. So, yeah, that's just a very important fact. And we should look for those opportunities when we think about our consumer products, our consumer packaged goods. We have the hefty, easy flaps, just emphasizing the ease with the tie. We know these are, barriers or friction points in that process, and making that easier is super powerful. On the bottom here, we have a hot breakfast. It's literally removing steps, making things so easy. And on the right, this is one of my favorite examples, in the motor oil category. This is a super, first off, there's probably not a lot of people here who change their own oil, but buying motor oil is like shopping for wine. People have little clue about how to make the choice. They know they obviously get the type for their motor, but then, beyond that, it's just shooting blind. But what we realize is that, easy pour is a big opportunity in this space, just because it is messy. This is something people can understand, and it's super differentiated from competitors. So that's a big opportunity. So the point is, find ways to capitalize on benefits that customers will value more relative to competitors. I have an example here from Apple. I'm going to play this. I'm hoping you guys can hear it. Even if you can't hear it, I don't think it's the end of the world. Okay, great. So interestingly, out of any benefit or feature the Apple could talk about, it's just that ease of the face recognition. It's just mind blowing how, simple and easy can be a value creation tool for a lot of companies. The last one is pay more for safety. I've always had trouble explaining this one to people until COVID hit. You start to recognize, when you pay more for this, safe companies, the tried and trusted brands. It became relevant when COVID hit, because you cling towards reliable, trusted, known quantities. And this is, I always give an example with hotels. Because, when you travel in different countries and you don't know potentially different hotels, you go to, one, you're going to pay more for something that's known to you, a trusted, reliable brand. Arm & Hammer has been around. During COVID, I remember going to the grocery store and when people were cleaning out shelves. And, it was funny, all the kind of new brands were, sitting out there, the new, new vegan or new alternative meat options. People just went and clung towards brands that been around and they're trusted. So this is a way to capitalize. They do have the power to charge more. And that's one thing I encourage a lot of these companies to do. You have that capacity to, increase your price. And this is something we should look into. That's what I would suggest to a lot of them. We have enhanced image. I mentioned this. So let's take a summary here. So the 5 paths to premiumization is a new way to kind of look at where you can potentially unlock value. Historically, we've focused on economics and innovation, adding features, adding benefits. Let's look at it from other angles, from different scientific, vantage points to find ways we can reframe and create value. We're going to showcase a little bit more on how that can, become actionable. But, this is something we do a lot with clients in terms of ideating and developing ideas to create new perceived value for customers. So a couple points, all these are not necessarily relevant for every category. Certain categories, they may not be relevant. For some, competitors may be going down certain paths. The goal is look for ones that are relevant for you, that customers will perceive value that competitors are not using. Sometimes it could be a combination of paths, but the point is, let's just broaden our horizons in terms of thinking about value creation. Okay, great. We're going to pivot to 4 strategies now to apply premiumization. So one of the things that clients always ask is, how do we go about this? Like, where do we start? What do I do? And, I developed kind of a 4 different strategies that we should think of kind of in this order. Because the goal is, we don't want to just start adding and layering in costs, right? That kind of defies what premiumization is. We want to get customers to perceive additional value without adding in lots of costs. So, we're going to go through each of these. So just raise the price is the first one. And, there's a lot of brands that are just doing this right now, just largely because they have to. With inflation. So, number 4, there's, severe consequences in terms of margins if, they don't pass along costs to their customers. So there's a lot of brands that just raise costs and, they just raise their price. They have that ability to do that. They are strong brands that, that are powerful. So I'm going to give a few other reasons why to provide some comfort in raising prices. The first is that we tend to think customers have this mental record of remembering prices, and that's not the case. I'm going to show some data on the next slide. That's just not the case. The second piece is higher prices signal better products. A lot of times customers are so busy, they use price as a proxy for quality. And that's powerful. Sometimes when you see, a few different brands and products, they differentiate on price, and they sometimes look for that as a cue that it's better. Especially in, categories where they don't have a lot of time where they spend, analyzing or making decisions. Next one is, trusted brands are safer choices. So, brands that have been around and are trusted, they're, safe. They're safe bets. They can have that opportunity to premiumize and charge more. They have a couple behavioral science levers on the right. Comparison neglect. Sometimes there's ways in which you can incorporate different behavioral science tactics just to kind of help nudge customers towards so they don't think about price in a way that allows direct comparisons. So the example I always give is for comparison neglect is pods. There's so many different types of pod quantities and price points. It's almost impossible to do the mental math to compare. There's 96, there's 86 pods, there's There's so many different offerings that, people do not have the capacity to do the mental math. And that's just one way that potentially, could be a way you find a way to raise the price. And I'll showcase that later. There's an example we have. And then reference prices. I'm also going to discuss some of that. People make decisions relative to a context. So having the right reference prices there will be key. I mentioned, I don't know, this is just a fascinating study in terms of people remembering prices. This was published in 2002. They actually went around to and followed different grocery shoppers, and literally after they put stuff in their basket, they'd ask them, how much were certain items that they put in their basket. And it was just amazing. 2% got the correct price. Within 5%, 21%, within 10%, 40%, 37%, and then 20%, 60%. So the point is, people don't have a good working memory in terms of recalling prices. This is when they just ask them after, going through their different shopping experiences. So, people don't have that serious capacity. They'll likely remember a range that's more realistic. And also, I'd say now with prices changing due to the online world. So for instance, if I put something in my Amazon cart, that price will change over the course of a day, week. It's just becoming too hard and challenging to remember prices. The second piece is, so one is just raise the price. And, not every company can do that. I recognize that. That's important to know. If your brand doesn't have a tremendous strength in the marketplace, you may not have that capacity to just increase the price. Therefore, you got to do something different. There's a lot of different ways to reframe value. And this could be, simple. What I like to think of, this is simple changes. This is not like significant stuff. On the right here, they just kind of literally change the direction and shape of this package in terms of this artisanal collection. It just looks significantly more premium. You could see the price tag, the delta, $219 versus $279. It's pretty much the same pasta. In the middle, we have thin Oreos, and on the left, some of this is downsizing with, quantity. In the food space, there's a big opportunity. The 100-calorie snack pack was a game changer for, it's like a premiumization, grand slam. Because, there's a goal attached to downsizing in the food space that's associated with, health and, moderation. Sometimes it's just simple package changes or, decorative label improvements. But the key thing with reframing the value proposition, this is one to tie nicely with the 5 paths. A lot of times we want to align with those 5 paths that competitors are not tapping into, that we know customers will perceive additional value. The goal is, let's find lower hanging fruits with, with ways to not ramp up costs. Some of these will have costs associated with them. But the point is, we always work towards finding the lowest cost that can increase the highest amount of perceived value. The next piece here is innovate existing products. Obviously, we can just add features and benefits to products. And then the last one is a portfolio strategy. And this was, really smart on Nike to do, and some companies really do this. This is taking a step back and looking at your portfolio and adding, a higher premium option, and then having that lift up the rest of the portfolio. So this is certainly another opportunity. Once, you take a step back, looking at it from a portfolio perspective, the goal is, find ways to halo that premium onto other models within the portfolio. So when we take a step back, the key pieces of this section is we want to increase contribution margin. So we want to create opportunities to create value without layering costs. Start with just raising the price. Think about that. What are the implications? Do we have the brand power to do that? Can we test that? Next, reframing the value proposition. It's about kind of finding some of those paths that are relevant, innovating existing products, adding in benefits, features, things that are perceived of value that will, increase the value. And then lastly is a portfolio strategy, adding a new product or flagship premium product and haloing some of those effects onto others in the portfolio. We're going to pivot over to this the 3 behavioral science tactics for value creation. So when we think about value, it's very, very much subjective. It's perceived, right? When it comes to different techniques in behavioral science, there's 3 that are super relevant that we're going to talk about that really make premiumization actually work. So customer perceived value, reference points, and framing. I'm going to go through each of these in turn. So clearly value is not objective. It's not absolute. If you ask someone what something costs, everyone's going to say something different. And when we break down this formula, there's customer perceived value, there's benefits we receive, and then there's price. It's what we have to give. It's how much a customer pays. That's kind of the formula. And we're going to go through the dynamics of this formula because it becomes important. We can dig into each of these to ultimately find ways to unlock value. I have an example here with makeup. This is kind of, pulling out those 5 paths would align to, the benefits, right? So we can, innovate, we can enhance image, or we can make it easier. We can find ways to increase the benefits that are perceived and that customers receive. There's also another element though, the price aspect, and I'm going to mention that in a second. Reference points is another important tool with value creation. A reference point is what people, so everyone has a value function, as we just mentioned, how customers perceive value. But the point is everyone compares that. There's always reference points that people compare something to. If I say, is, your phone cheap or expensive? It's going to be compared to what? We always have to compare to something. That's so key. It could be compared to something you expect to pay, something that are in the market. So think about like comps. If you're looking at a home, there's what other homes are priced. Or if you're looking at a shelf, it's what competitors are priced at. There's historical prices. We just mentioned people don't have a running record of those, so they're not necessarily a really great reference point. Sometimes they can be for people shopping online that look back and check. But the point is we have reference points. And the key thing from a behavioral science perspective is we can manipulate those. We can change reference points and ultimately shape how people perceive value depending on what they compare to. So here's a example that I often explain. So Nespresso pods, are these expensive? I get it's compared to what? If we compare them to, Folgers, buying, coffee ground, it's certainly significantly more expensive. It's almost outrageous compared to how cheap that is to just buy ground coffee. But if we compare it to a Starbucks, coffee every day, this is a great value. So it all comes down to who our reference point is. DiGiorno has this in their tagline. It's not delivery, it's DiGiorno. We want to use reference points that help us be perceived as a higher value. And the last piece is framing. Framing is the other key piece to how to create value when it comes to behavioral science principles. Framing is just a way of presenting information to influence our decisions. There's always many ways. There's always at least 2 ways to frame something, sometimes more. So I'm just going to give a couple examples. Kill 99% of germs, or the alternative is only 1% of germs survive. 2% milk, or 98% fat-free. There's always ways to frame things that have implications for how consumers choose. Age defense, or younger, longer. There's always, different ways to frame things is the key thing. And they have significant implications for how a consumer will process that product and brand, its benefits, its features, and how it works, and how much they actually ultimately value it. This is something we test often with clients just to find ways to unlock perceived value. So let's take a step back. There's three levers in this kind of value perception. On the receive side, there's the evaluate of the benefits. There's ways to frame to create value. And then also on the price side, we can frame with pricing too. There's ways which we can make people perceive that something is cheaper by, giving different price frames. And we'll mention, we have kind of a piece in the case study at the end that showcases how we did that with one of our clients. I just have an example of each of these price framing. This is kind of the takeaway slide. Use innovative price structures to differentiate from competitors. Amazon, I have here. This is something they do quite often with framing their subscription program. It used to be a little bit different. You had to qualify for free shipping. Now they switched it to where you buy a Prime membership and then you just think everything's free. So it's not free, but you've already paid for it. They reframed the price of it into a membership, so you don't have to think about it. Reference framing. Here's an example with water. Actually, sorry, this is a facial spray. They literally took their water and turned it into a facial spray and charged, $2.50 an ounce versus 3 cents an ounce. So that's a mind-blowing reference framing opportunity. Benefit framing. This is another opportunity to, frame a benefit relative to a competitor to ultimately unlock perceived value. We're going to finish up here with a testing and case example. So for those of you that aren't aware of this category that we did work in it is the allergy introduction products. So it's in the infant space. And the premise behind it is if you introduce infants to allergies at a young age, they will not develop them later in life, right? So in other words, they offer different forms of food and mix-ins and formulas that, in other words, their pioneered ingredient that they have is in food. It's in 3 different forms. It's in crackers, puffs, and mix-ins. And when you take that, it reduces an infant's incidence of developing allergies later in life. This is a very new category to moms. They don't really understand the benefits. This is new. They're looking to where to position on shelf to ultimately help moms understand what they are, help moms choose them as well, and also pay more for them. This is a challenge because this product with a great benefit in it is going to sit next to things that are significantly cheaper. So it's going to come in, a cracker form, and there's going to be cheap crackers, and then there's going to be this cracker that's very expensive. So it's going to, be a hard sell. So we had to understand some of the ways to optimize choice, comprehension, willingness to pay, knowing that there's going to be these significant challenges sitting next to these potential products. And how are they going to be able to win over mom's choices, as well as incentivize them to want to pay more, motivate them to want to pay more. So we tested this in 3 different contexts. And this is important because, a context facilitates a lot of information about a new product. It tells you, in terms of what are the benefits, what's it for. It tells you how much potentially you should be paying for it. The example I always give is like, if you're to buy a beer in the Ritz Carlton versus a beach bar, obviously it could be the same product, but depending on the context, it's going to mean different things. So one of the key things is with an experiment we designed is we always create, a shelf context, and we put competitors that are relevant in there. It's key because we need reference products that helps us. We want to make it contextual, as real as possible. We also need reference pricing. this helps, all decisions are made in reference to things. And we need those key pieces of information to facilitate a better customer choice. So what we do is we mock up 3 different contexts, and we put our clients' products in the middle. And what we did, and each of these is different contexts. So we have formula context, we have a food context, we have a supplement context. And we had 2 of each of these, and we had them at different price points. Total of 6 conditions, randomized, the monadic research designed, very experimental, which allowed us to test, to look at what a customer would choose in these particular settings. And what we did was compare choice amongst the different experimental contexts that we had here. And the way in which we test choice is through this behavioral choice lottery question. And, there's a lot of ways people ask questions about what people like or what they'll do in the future. One of the ways we pioneered that helped is a better predictor of choice is, incentivize the choice. It's more of a behavioral measure. So the way in which we ask it, the example I always give is like, if I were to ask you, would you go to the gym? Everyone's going to say yes. If I say, here's a 30-day subscription to Netflix or a 30-day subscription to your gym, which do you choose? That is going to be a better proxy for what someone's going to do in the real world, is when we put skin in the game and allow people to make a choice that's going to more align with what they're going to do in the real world. And that's exactly what we did here. This is going to be a better measure of actual consumer behavior. And that's what we did. And what the results was that a certain retail location stood out in terms of choice. And interestingly, price one was a slightly higher price point. This was super interesting to see that a higher price point actually won out. And the reason that we're able to uncover this is because we tested it at different price points. And that is what is key, is to test it in context with different price points. So we look for opportunities to increase price, and to fully understand that you can't ask a customer. You have to put it in a context, and you have to test which they choose. And the choice of that is a proxy of that willingness to accept that price point. The other interesting thing we did was test the pack size relative to price. So what we did was had like a Tinder setup where they were swiping between a pack size in terms of how many they get and relative to a price. One of the things we realized was, there's different ways to frame the quantity. Should it be 7 days, 1 week, 5 count? There's different ways to frame that where people can interpret it differently, as well as different price points. We use some of the behavioral economics studies to, test different round numbers, nines, and things of that sort. Our takeaway was, over multiple trials of this was, when we moved off the 7-day mark, moving towards a larger count, that kind of pushed beyond, people's ability to do that mental math. And, it seemed to add a little bit of value. So the point is, we're looking for ways in which we can potentially provide a way of creating additional value for customers by exploring how they perceive that trade-off between quantity and price in a certain pack size. So that's that for the case study. In terms of Beezy, there's kind of a few areas we focus on that, work to help with premiumization. One is, auditing and developing playbooks. It's kind of analyzing a brand or product and, giving our expert recommendations and then sharing them out. That's certainly one way. In the middle here, we do host ideations along these 5 paths. We understand that, you guys are focused on innovating in your way. We like to push those boundaries, explore ways to come up with new ideas that would be value creating. And then lastly, we always do testing. So just kind of like we mentioned, we do love testing to, uncover ways in which we can create additional value. We have about 7 minutes left. If any of you guys have questions, I'm happy to take them. Just pop them into the chat box and we can answer them. If you don't, it's always good too. You can shoot me an email. I'm going to leave my email here for those of you that want it. You can expect to see a recording as well as the report. If you'd like, reach out if you'd like the report. Otherwise, I'm just going to share the recording. Yeah, I appreciate you guys hopping on today. Really appreciate it. Hope you guys learned something new and that you could apply to your research as well as to your different brands and products. Thank you guys for attending.